If you're reading this, then you've already signed the lease. I'm sorry. I truly am. Maybe you'll be smarter than I was. Maybe you'll leave before it's too late. I came to Dust Haven looking for quiet. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth was messier. I was running from my past. 15 years on the Dallas police force leaves marks on a man. Especially when those years end with an internal affairs investigation and the quiet suggestion that resignation would be preferable to prosecution. I wasn't a bad cop. Not at first. But a mortgage, alimony payments, and the slow erosion of principles can turn anyone into someone they don't recognize. The first bribe I took felt like swallowing glass. By the fifth, it went down smooth as whiskey. When everything collapsed, I needed somewhere nobody knew my name. Somewhere cheap, somewhere forgotten. Dust Haven, Texas fit the bill perfectly. The town appeared suddenly as I crested a hill, my ancient Chevy pickup groaning under the weight of my few possessions. Dust Haven sat in a shallow valley, a cluster of faded buildings shimmering in the August heat. Main Street consisted of a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of storefronts with sun-bleached advertisements in their windows. I rolled down my window, letting in air that smelled of scorched earth and distant cattle. The rental agency, if you could dignify it, with such a formal name, operated out of what had once been a hardware store. A hand-painted sign read, Hank's Properties and Notary, in chipped red letters. Inside, a ceiling fan stirred the hot air without cooling it. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, announcing my arrival before the bell above the door finished its tiny chime. You must be Ramsey. The man behind the counter didn't look up from his newspaper. Hank Dobson was exactly as he'd sounded on the phone, weathered, disinterested, and permanently parched. His voice had the growly quality of someone who'd been smoking since childhood. That's right, Cole Ramsey. I extended my hand. He looked at it for a moment before giving it a perfunctory shake. Paperwork's ready. He slid a folder across the counter. Juniper House is yours for 6 months. Rent's due first of the month, cash only. I flipped through the lease agreement, scanning for anything unusual. It was surprisingly straightforward. No security deposit, no credit check, just the monthly payment and a promise to maintain the property's condition. Given what I was paying, I'd expected more strings attached. Seems too good to be true, I said, signing my name on the dotted line. Hank's expression didn't change. It's 10 miles out of town on a dirt road, no internet, spotty cell service, and the nearest neighbor is Old Man EMTT, half a mile down the way. He took the signed papers and handed me a tarnished key. Most folks want convenience. You're getting what you pay for. I pocketed the key. Fair enough. Any quirks I should know about? Something flickered across Hank's face, so brief I almost missed it. Concern, amusement, whatever it was, it vanished quickly. Old houses have personalities, he said finally. Juniper is no different. Mr. EMTT will fill you in on the particulars. I waited for him to elaborate, but he'd already returned to his newspaper. Our business was concluded. The drive to Juniper House took longer than expected. The dirt road twisted through scrubby mosquite trees and patches of withered grass. My truck bounced over ruts and potholes, sending dust billowing behind me like a copper-colored ghost. When I finally saw it, the house stood stark against the empty sky. 2 stories of weathered wood and peeling paint with a wraparound porch that sagged in the middle like a weary spine. The window's tall narrow things reflected the setting sun with an intensity that made them appear to be burning from within. Juniper House, my home for the next 6 months. I parked beside a gnarled oak tree and sat for a moment, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant call of cicadas. The silence had weight here, pressing against my eardrums like cotton wool. The front steps groaned under my weight as I approached the door. The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been recently oiled. Inside, the air was cooler but stale, carrying the musty scent of disuse and something else, something faintly sweet and medicinal. I stood in the entryway, taking inventory. To my right, a living room with furniture draped in white sheets like patient ghosts. To my left, a dining room with a table that could seat 8. Straight ahead, a staircase climbed to the second floor, its banister smooth from decades of palm sliding along its surface. I moved through the rooms, pulling sheets off furniture, opening windows to let in the evening air. The house was fully furnished in a style that suggested the early 1980s floral patterns, dark wood, and brass fixtures. Everything was clean, but dated, preserved like a museum exhibit of middle-class Americana. The kitchen surprised me with its modernity. A new refrigerator hummed quietly, and the stove looked recently installed. On the counter sat a basket covered with a checkered cloth. I lifted it to find fresh bread, a jar of homemade preserves, and a note written in elegant cursive. "Welcome to Juniper House. I'll come by tomorrow to discuss the rules." EMTT rules. There it was again. What kind of rental property came with rules beyond the standard "don't burn the place down"? I unpacked my truck as darkness fell, arranging my meager belongings throughout the house. My clothes barely filled one dresser drawer. My books, mostly crime novels and military history, fit on a single shelf. 15 years of life in Dallas, reduced to what could fit in the bed of a pickup. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard it. A soft thump from upstairs, like something heavy being set down. I froze, knife hovering over the bread, listening. The house settled around me, its wooden bones adjusting to the cooling night air. Just an old house being an old house, I told myself. But as I climbed the stairs to choose a bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, 4 closed doors offering identical possibilities. I opened each one methodically. The first, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and fixtures that had gone out of style when Nixon was president. The second, a small bedroom with twin beds and faded cowboy wallpaper. The third, a larger bedroom with a queen-sized bed and heavy curtains. I chose this one, setting my duffel bag on the floor and testing the mattress. Firm, but not uncomfortable. I'd slept on worse. The fourth door at the end of the hall remained. I approached it, turned the knob, and pushed. Locked. I jiggled the handle, more curious than concerned. Why would one room be locked in a house I was renting? A noise from outside interrupted my thoughts, the crunch of tires on gravel. I moved to the window and peered out. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the driveway. A battered station wagon came to a stop behind my truck. An elderly man emerged, moving with the deliberate care of someone whose joints protested every action. He stood beside his car for a moment, looking up at the house at my window specifically before making his way to the front door. The doorbell chimed, a surprisingly cheerful sound in the quiet house. I found him on the porch, straight back despite his age, with a face mapped by deep lines and eyes that held the sharp clarity of someone half his years. He wore pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, dressed for a social call rather than a neighborly introduction. "Mr. Ramsey," he said, extending a hand. "Elijah Emmett, I see you found my welcome basket." His grip was firm, his skin cool and papery. "I did, thank you. I wasn't expecting a welcoming committee. Dust Haven may be small, but we're not uncivilized." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "May I come in? There are matters we should discuss." I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved through the house with the familiarity of someone who'd visited many times, making his way to the living room without guidance. I expected Hank would have mentioned the rules, he said, lowering himself into an armchair, but he rarely does. Says it scares off potential tenants. I sat across from him. What rules are we talking about, Mr. EMTT? Elijah, please. He folded his hands in his lap. Juniper House has peculiarities, requirements for harmonious habitation, you might say. The formal language struck me as odd, but I dealt with enough eccentrics during my police years to know when to just let someone talk. I'm listening. There are 5 rules in total. They may seem strange, but I assure you they're necessary. He fixed me with a stare that felt like being caught in a spotlight. First, never enter the locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway. I thought of the door I just tried to open. I don't have a key for it anyway. The key exists, he said, but you must never use it, even if you find it. That room remains sealed always. The intensity in his voice raised the hair on my arms. Okay, what's the second rule? The mannequins in the basement must remain in the basement. Under no circumstances are they to be brought upstairs. I blinked. Mannequins. Yes. There are 12 of them. They belong to the house. You'll find them arranged in the basement. They must stay there. I hadn't even known the house had a basement. Why would I want to move mannequins around? Elijah didn't answer directly. The third rule: if you hear footsteps on the porch at night, do not open the door, no matter who you think it might be. A chill crawled up my spine despite the warm evening. Mr. EMTT Elijah. These rules sound less like tenant guidelines and more like warnings. He nodded. They are precisely that. Rule 4. If you see a mannequin where it shouldn't be, return it to the basement immediately. Do not delay. Do not wait until morning. And if I don't, the question slipped out before I could stop it. Elijah's expression hardened. Then you will learn why Rule 5 exists. If a mannequin touches you, you must leave Juniper House immediately and never return. You will have until sunrise. We sat in silence, the old clock on the mantel ticking loudly in the quiet room. Outside, cicadas pulsed their endless summer rhythm. This is a joke, right? I finally said, some kind of local hazing for newcomers. I wish it were. Elijah stood, his movements suddenly seeming more labored than before. The previous tenant didn't believe me either. He lasted 3 weeks. What happened to him? He broke Rule 3. Elijah moved toward the door. Remember what I've told you, Mr. Ramsey. Juniper House can be a peaceful home if you respect its boundaries. I followed him to the porch, watching as he made his way back to his station wagon. Before getting in, he turned to me one last time. I'll check on you in a few days. In the meantime, perhaps familiarize yourself with the basement. It's best to know what you're dealing with. I watched his tail lights disappear down the driveway, red eyes blinking out in the darkness. The night seemed heavier now, the distant sounds of nature muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Back inside, I locked the door and leaned against it. Part of me, the rational ex-cop part, wanted to dismiss Elijah's warnings as the ramblings of a superstitious old man. But another part, a deeper instinct honed by years of patrol work, whispered that something wasn't right. I found the basement door in the kitchen, hidden in plain sight beside the pantry. A simple wooden door with a glass knob that turned easily in my hand. Cool air wafted up from below, carrying that same sweet medicinal smell I'd noticed earlier, only stronger now. My hand found a light switch on the wall. A single bulb illuminated a set of steep stairs descending into shadow. I should wait until morning, I thought. Exploring an unfamiliar basement at night was the kind of decision that got people killed in horror movies. But if I was going to live here, I needed to know what I was dealing with. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The basement was larger than I expected, extending under the entire house. The concrete floor was clean and dry, the walls lined with shelves containing boxes and mason jars filled with unidentifiable contents. In the center of the room stood a long table, empty except for a folded piece of paper. And against the far wall, arranged in a perfect semicircle, were the mannequins. 12 figures, life-sized and unnervingly realistic. They weren't the featureless display dummies you'd see in department stores. These had distinct faces painted with careful detail, eyes that seemed to follow me, lips curved in slight smiles. They wore clothes from different eras. A woman in a 1950s house dress, a man in a World War II uniform, a child in overalls that might have been from the Depression. I approached slowly, heart pounding against my ribs. Up close, I could see the fine cracks in their porcelain skin, the careful brush strokes that created the illusion of life. What the hell, I muttered, circling the arrangement. Each mannequin faced the center of the room, positioned as if frozen in the act of stepping forward. Their eyes, glass or painted I couldn't tell, seemed to track my movement. I turned my attention to the paper on the table. Unfolding it revealed the same elegant handwriting from the welcome note. The children of Juniper House must remain below. Count them each night. If one is missing, find it quickly. Children, he called them children. I looked back at the mannequins, counting them silently. 1 through 12, all present and accounted for. Their painted smiles seemed to widen in the dim light, a trick of shadows and my increasingly uneasy mind. I backed toward the stairs, unwilling to turn my back on them. The single bulb flickered once, plunging the basement into momentary darkness. When the light returned, the mannequins remained exactly as they were, unmoving, unchanging, yet somehow more alert than before. I retreated upstairs, closing the basement door firmly behind me. The rational part of my brain insisted this was all elaborate nonsense, perhaps a local tradition of scaring newcomers. But as I checked the locks on all the doors and windows before heading to bed, I couldn't shake the image of those 12 faces waiting patiently in the dark below my feet. That night, I dreamed of porcelain hands reaching for me from the shadows and a locked door at the end of a hallway behind which something whispered my name. I woke to the sound of knocking. Not the sharp rap of knuckles on wood, but something softer. A gentle rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from inside the walls. Tap tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Like someone trying to get my attention without waking the whole house. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the curtains, painting warm stripes across the bedroom floor. For a moment, I lay still, orienting myself. This wasn't my Dallas apartment with its perpetual traffic noise and neighbors' arguments. This was Juniper House with its creaking floors and strange rules. The knocking had stopped. Maybe I'd dreamed it. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as my bare feet touched the cold hardwood. The house felt different in daylight, less menacing, more merely neglected, like an elderly relative who'd once been formidable, but had now faded into fragility. My phone showed no service. As expected, I'd have to drive into town for calls or internet. The isolation that had seemed appealing yesterday now carried an undercurrent of vulnerability. No one would hear me if I called for help. Not that I needed help. I was a grown man, a former police officer, unsettled by an old house and an old man's ghost stories. Ridiculous. I made coffee in the kitchen, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams. The basement door remained closed, exactly as I'd left it. Outside the window, Dust Haven's scrubby landscape stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional MS Quiet tree and Mr. EMTT's distant rooftop. Mr. EMTT. The rules. In the harsh light of morning, his warnings seemed like the ramblings of a bored old man entertaining himself by scaring the newcomer. Still, I found myself glancing at the basement door while I ate breakfast, half expecting it to swing open on its own. After washing my dishes, I decided to properly explore the property. The yard surrounding Juniper House was larger than I'd realized. Almost 2 acres of sun-baked earth with patches of stubborn grass. A clothesline sagged between 2 metal poles. A shed listed to one side near the back fence, its door secured with a rusted padlock. I circled the house, noting the peeling paint and loose shutters. The foundation seemed solid enough, but the place needed work. Nothing urgent, just the accumulated neglect of years without proper care. I could handle basic repairs. It would give me something to do besides dwelling on my mistakes. When I reached the back porch, I noticed something odd. A child's toy, a wooden horse on wheels, sat in the center of the steps. It looked antique, hand-carved with faded red paint chipping from its mane. I was certain it hadn't been there yesterday. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The wood felt smooth, worn by years of play. Someone had etched initials into the bottom, EJ. The toy horse felt wrong in my hands, like holding something that didn't belong to me. I set it down on the porch railing and continued my inspection of the house. By midday, the Texas heat had become oppressive. I retreated inside, grateful for the house's thick walls that kept the interior relatively cool. As I passed through the living room, I noticed the toy horse sitting on the coffee table. I stopped, staring at it. I'd left it outside. I was certain of that. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish even as I did so. "Anyone here?" The house answered with silence. I picked up the horse again, this time carrying it to the front door. I stepped outside, walked to my truck, and locked the toy in the glove compartment. Whatever game someone was playing, I wasn't participating. Back inside, I decided to tackle the one task I'd been avoiding, checking the basement. In daylight, with a clear head, I could properly assess what I was dealing with. The basement door opened with the same soft creak as before. I flipped the light switch and descended the stairs, each step feeling more solid than it had last night. At the bottom, I turned to face the mannequins. They stood in their semicircle exactly as I remembered. 12 figures frozen in time, their painted faces serene and watchful. In daylight, or at least in the harsh illumination of the bare bulb, they looked less sinister. Just antiques, probably valuable to collectors, but otherwise harmless. I approached them, studying each one more carefully than I had in the darkness. Their clothes were authentic period pieces, not costumes. The craftsmanship of the mannequins themselves was remarkable, each face unique, with tiny details like freckles or laugh lines. Their hands were particularly well made, with individual fingers and even fingernails. I counted them again, 1 through 12, all present. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small door in the far corner that I hadn't noticed last night. It was painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible unless you were looking directly at it. No bigger than a crawl space entrance, maybe 3 feet high. I crossed the basement and crouched before it. No handle, just a small keyhole. Another locked door in Juniper House. Another boundary I wasn't supposed to cross. Curiosity prickled at the back of my neck. What was behind these locked doors that Elijah Emmett was so